My daughter, Joanna, insisted she was flourishing, her voice a little too bright, a fraction too quick during our video calls. She'd paint these elaborate verbal pictures of her husband, Todd, as a paragon of kindness, a man who supposedly materialized with her morning coffee before her feet even touched the floor, who chivalrously shielded her from the mundane labor of household chores. He would, according to her carefully constructed narrative, appear like a knight in shining armor to collect her if a single raindrop threatened, and conjure homemade chicken soup from thin air the moment a sniffle escaped her. And her mood swings? Those were met with his signature, goofy husband dance, a performance allegedly designed to coax laughter from her. I would listen, my facial muscles aching from the effort of maintaining an expression of placid maternal interest, a mask of serene acceptance. But beneath the surface, my fingers would dig into the unforgiving plastic edge of my phone, a silent testament to the turmoil churning within me. Her face, framed by the unforgiving glow of the call, was a canvas of pallor, not the delicate fairness of her youth, but the stark, unhealthy whiteness one associates with the sterile, fluorescent ambience of a hospital corridor. Her lips would stretch into the shape of a smile, a valiant but ultimately unconvincing effort, while her eyes, those usually vibrant windows to her soul, remained disconcertingly empty, dull, as if an essential inner light had been cruelly extinguished. This marked the third occasion she'd cited the flu as the reason for yet another hospital visit, her explanation delivered with that same strained cheerfulness. The previous time, it had been a virulent stomach bug. Before that, a clumsy trip down the stairs. But this was Joanna, my Joanna, a woman so inherently cautious she'd religiously clutch the handrail merely to descend a few familiar steps. The notion of her simply eye-falling felt preposterous, an ill-fitting costume on her true character. And stomach pains so severe they necessitated intravenous fluids, only to be nonchalantly dismissed as the consequence of too much dessert last night. The excuse was flimsy, transparent. I've weathered the storms of motherhood for too many decades to be deceived by such transparent fabrications. I am intimately familiar with the particular cadence of a lie woven from threads of guilt and fear, a story concocted solely to shield me from worry. "Don't always assume the worst, Mom," she chirped, punctuating the admonition with a soft, breathy laugh that didn't quite reach those vacant eyes. "I'm genuinely okay. Please stop overthinking." I'd offer a slow nod, a silent acquiescence, deliberately refraining from pressing further. My strategy was one of patient observation. If I didn't challenge her directly, she might continue to speak, and with each word, another piece of the fragmented puzzle might fall into place. But she was more astute, more guarded than I anticipated. Barely 3 minutes into our carefully orchestrated conversation, she'd conclude with a muted, "I should probably go grab something to eat. Let's chat later." The instant her image vanished from the screen, replaced by the cold, indifferent black, a crushing weight, heavy as lead, settled onto my chest. I didn't believe a single syllable. She proclaimed happiness, but her entire being screamed a silent, desperate contradiction. That evening, the disquiet gnawing at me, I reached out to my son, Jason. He answered, his attention clearly divided, the telltale clicks and whirs of his game controller providing an unwelcome soundtrack to our conversation. "Mom, you're seriously overthinking this," he'd said, his tone laced with a dismissive fondness. "Didn't Joanna tell you multiple times? Todd treats her incredibly well. They're doing just fine. But she's constantly in the hospital, Jason," I pressed, my voice tight with the frustration he couldn't seem to grasp. "Doesn't that strike you as profoundly odd?" "She's always been a bit delicate, hasn't she?" Jason responded, the shrug almost audible in his voice. "Remember when she was a kid? Stomach aches practically every other week. That's just her constitution." A light chuckle followed. "And besides, I know Todd. The guy's awkward, painfully shy. Definitely not the type to harm anyone, let alone Joanna." I remained silent, the unspoken words heavy between us. He, oblivious, continued his defense, still chuckling. Wait, you're not actually contemplating driving all the way over there, are you? That's what? A 3-hour journey? Yes, I stated, my voice devoid of any inflection. I am indeed thinking about it. The admission finally pierced his gaming-induced fog. His tone shifted, a note of incredulity creeping in. Wait, Mom, you're not actually serious, are you? Jason, this isn't me indulging in melodrama, I said, the overhead kitchen light casting harsh shadows across my face as my hand rested on the crisp, newly printed bus ticket lying on the table. She's my daughter. A mother possesses an innate understanding, a primal instinct, when her child is ensnared in a lie, much like a bird instinctively senses an impending shift in the wind. But she explicitly told you not to come. She said she's fine, he countered, his voice now laced with genuine concern. She told me she's perfectly fine, I cut in, my patience wearing thin. And then she instructed me not to worry, 3 distinct times. And with each repetition, her eyes darted away, just a little more frantically. A beat of silence stretched between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was softer, tinged with a reluctant understanding. Just be careful, okay, Mom? The following morning, under the cloak of a pale, indifferent dawn, I didn't inform Joanna. I didn't confide in anyone. I boarded a long-distance bus bound for Cedar Falls, the vehicle's engine a low rumble of purpose. I traveled with minimal luggage, a deliberate choice to avoid raising any alarm bells. 3 changes of clothes, a small, unassuming notebook, and my worn black handbag. Tucked inside were some carefully counted cash, my driver's license, and 30 years of accumulated, unwavering mother's intuition. She had assured me of her well-being, yet she was, once again, confined within the sterile walls of a hospital. He had claimed she merely fell, yet her gait, even in my mind's eye from our last brief in-person visit months ago, was marred by a distinct, painful limp. She had attributed it all to a string of unfortunate luck, but her eyes mirrored the terror of a startled deer, wide, unnervingly glossy, and profoundly scared. She hadn't divulged the truth because her primary concern was to shield me from worry, a noble but misguided sacrifice. But I, her mother, couldn't find a moment's peace, couldn't surrender to sleep, until I unearthed the unvarnished truth. And so, I embarked on a quest to find it. Upon my arrival in Cedar Falls, I eschewed the direct route to her apartment. Instead, I checked into a modest, slightly down-at-heel motel situated directly across the street. The front desk clerk, a young man with an overly cheerful, practiced smile, inquired, "Here for a little getaway, ma'am?" I returned his smile with one of my own, equally practiced. "Just visiting my daughter," I replied, the partial truth tasting like ash in my mouth. The deeper truth was, I harbored no certainty I'd even be granted a glimpse of her. Her apartment building, grandly named Willow Creek, exuded an aura of expensive security. Surveillance cameras, like unblinking, metallic eyes, were strategically positioned on every corner. A uniformed doorman, stern-faced and vigilant, presided over the front desk. There was no conceivable way an uninvited, unannounced guest could simply saunter in. But I wasn't in a precipitate rush. I possessed an abundance of patience, a mother's infinite capacity to wait. I found a vacant seat on the outdoor patio of a small cafe, directly opposite her building, ordered a latte milk, no sugar, and settled in, my gaze fixed unwaveringly on the building's imposing entrance as I slowly, deliberately sipped the lukewarm beverage. 1 hour bled into the next. The sun, a molten orb, began its slow, inexorable descent towards the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Still, there was no sign of Joanna. I sent her a text message. "What are you up to, sweetheart?" Her reply was almost instantaneous, a digital ping of feigned normalcy. "Working late again, Mom. Don't you worry about me." But my eyes had been glued to that formidable front door all afternoon, an unwavering vigil. Joanna hadn't emerged, not once. Not even a fleeting shadow had crossed the threshold. At precisely 9 o'clock that night, under the cloak of a starless, oppressive sky, I returned. This time, I positioned myself directly on the front steps of her building, my eyes still locked on the entrance, scarcely daring to blink, lest I miss a crucial, fleeting movement. Then a voice, raspy and sharp-edged, tinged with an unmistakable note of suspicion, sliced through the silence from behind me. "Hey, you with the FBI or something?" I nearly leaped out of my skin, spinning around with a startled gasp to find myself face to face with an elderly woman. She was clad in comfortable-looking pajama pants, a pair of fuzzy, well-worn slippers, and a surprisingly elegant silk robe. Her silver hair was piled high on her head in a somewhat precarious, yet artful, bun. In one hand, she clutched a cat leash, though curiously, there was no feline in sight. "Excuse me?" I managed, my heart still hammering against my ribs. She squinted, her gaze sharp and appraising, studying me for a long, unnerving second. Then, she leaned in conspiratorially, as if we were about to exchange classified government secrets. "Or maybe," she whispered, her voice dropping, "you're a private investigator? I've been observing you since this afternoon, girl. Even the neighbor's yappy poodle doesn't stake out this building with the kind of dedication you're showing." A surprised laugh escaped me, genuine and unrestrained. "No, I'm just—" She clapped her hands together with sudden, decisive energy. "Say no more. I fully support your endeavors. If you're here to expose a cheater, my lips are sealed. I won't utter a peep. I absolutely cannot stand that odious man in 4B. Always out on his balcony late at night, chain smoking like he owns the entire complex. The whole place reeks of stale ash the next morning." I found myself laughing again, a real, heartfelt laugh, the first I'd experienced in what felt like an eternity of 2 very long days. She extended a surprisingly strong, weathered hand. "Margie Thompson, retired school teacher, vice president, self-appointed, of the Neighborhood Gossip League, coffee enthusiast, and proud to supply any and all information in the noble name of justice." I took her offered hand, its grip firm and reassuring. "Madison Dawson, I'm here to protect my daughter, and I'm desperately trying to find the truth." Something in her expression shifted, a subtle but profound change. Her eyes, already sharp, sharpened further, glinting with a flicker of sudden, deep understanding. "Your daughter, she lives here?" she asked, her tone noticeably softer now, stripped of its earlier playful theatricality. I nodded, unable to articulate more, a lump emoji forming in my throat. She plopped down on the cool stone steps beside me, her expression thoughtful, her gaze distant. I had a feeling something was off with that particular unit lately. My breath hitched. What did you hear?" She leaned in a little closer, her voice dropping to a near whisper. "Last Wednesday, I believe, around 2 in the morning. I was up getting a glass of water, didn't latch my balcony door all the way, you see, and I could hear voices drifting up from outside. At first, I dismissed it as just a couple having a spat, you know how it is. But then, She hesitated, her brow furrowing, her voice sinking even lower. Then it didn't sound like a typical argument anymore. She paused, her face tightening with a remembered disquiet. There was a sound, like something heavy crashing, and then a woman, sobbing, begging, actually. My fingers curled instinctively, unconsciously, into tight, painful fists, my nails digging into my palms. Margie turned to look at me directly, her voice now gentle, laced with an unexpected tenderness. "Your daughter, she's that quiet one, isn't she? Long, dark hair, tends to keep to herself mostly, doesn't engage much with anyone." I could only nod again, the affirmation caught in my throat. She sighed, a soft, mournful sound. She always struck me as the kind who'd keep her suffering locked away, hidden deep inside. It's a real shame. This place, it presents such an upscale facade, but believe you me, it's teeming with men in expensive suits who possess hearts as rotten as last week's fruit. My eyes stung with unshed tears. Margie gave my knee a comforting maternal pat. "But you're here now. You absolutely did the right thing, coming here. I may not be as spry on my feet as I once was, but I've got ears like a bat, strategically placed everywhere. I walk my currently absent. Cat mittens around this entire building 3 times a day. I know when every single houseplant on this block gets watered. I couldn't help it. Another laugh, tinged with hysteria this time, burst from me. She grinned, a wide, conspiratorial expression. I'll be out front tomorrow morning, 7 a.m., sharp, catching the early sun. If you require any further intel, or just a friendly face, come find me. Thank you, Margie. Don't thank me, she said, sitting up a little straighter, a mock-serious expression on her face. I'm merely fulfilling my civic duty in the pursuit of justice. Then, she leaned in again, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. But seriously, between you and me, that man gives me the serious creeps. I knew he was bad news from the get-go. Even his eyebrows look like they belong on a cartoon villain. I laughed again, a genuine, cleansing release. For the first time in what felt like an age, I didn't feel entirely, crushingly alone in my fear and suspicion. I didn't return to the impersonal chill of the motel room that night. Instead, I sought refuge in the dim, greasy spoon ambience of a nearby 24-hour diner. The lighting was aggressively dim, casting long, dancing shadows, but it was just bright enough for me to discern the faded blue ink on the small, crumpled sticky note clutched in my hand. On it, scribbled hastily, was Joanna's apartment access code. She'd mentioned it once, offhandedly, during a rare unguarded moment months ago. A just-in-case contingency. I jotted it down without conscious thought, never imagining, not even in my darkest premonitions, that I would ever actually have cause to use it. But the insistent voice in my head, the one that had been a faint whisper of unease, was now a deafening, unequivocal roar. She wasn't happy. She was meticulously, desperately, covering up a profound unhappiness. And my presence here wasn't solely for unearthing the truth. I was here to extricate her, to bring her out of whatever darkness had enveloped her. I lost count of the numerous times I surreptitiously checked the front of the imposing apartment building throughout the following day, my anxiety a tight knot in my stomach. Perhaps it was the 7th, or maybe the 8th, reconnaissance mission, when Margie, materializing as if from nowhere, gently tapped my arm and whispered, her voice a low, urgent breath. He's gone. Dark gray suit, sharp creases, car keys jangling in his hand. Looked like he departed in quite a rush. Left shoe was untied, if you can believe. I looked up at her, noticing for the first time that she looked even more energized, more invested than she had the previous day. She was dressed in a clean, neatly pressed sweater, and a faint, pleasant hint of floral perfume wafted from her. You going in? She asked, her eyes bright with anticipation and a touch of shared conspiracy. I nodded, my throat too dry to speak, committing the sequence of numbers from the sticky note to indelible memory. Margie leaned closer, her voice dropping to a barely audible murmur. If you're not back out here in precisely 30 minutes, I'm calling the cops. And don't you fret about me overreacting. I happen to be the only resident in this entire building with 2 officially filed police reports on my record, both for disturbing the peace by reporting actual disturbances, mind you. I managed a weak, tremulous smile. That makes you my most reliable backup, Margie. I crossed the busy street, my palms slick with nervous perspiration. The metal keypad felt cold and unyielding beneath my trembling fingers as I carefully, deliberately entered the code. When I heard the distinct, satisfying click of the lock disengaging and the heavy door releasing with a soft pneumatic hiss, I nearly forgot to breathe. The hallway beyond was eerily, unnaturally quiet, like venturing through a subterranean tunnel lined with thick, sound-dampening velvet. The elevator ride to her floor felt agonizingly slower than it had the day before, when I'd merely observed it from afar, each illuminated floor number, a torturous increment of suspense. I could hear the frantic thumping of my own heartbeat, a frantic drum against the oppressive silence. When I finally reached her floor, I stood motionless in front of her apartment door for a long, breathless moment, gathering my resolve. Then, without the courtesy of a knock, I entered the access code again. The door swung inward with a soft, almost apologetic sigh. Inside, The apartment was shrouded in a dim, melancholic gloom. The only illumination emanated from a faint, pulsating blue glow in a far corner, an air purifier humming its monotonous, soft lament. The heavy curtains were drawn tightly shut, imprisoning the stale, oppressive air, which was thick with the cloying, medicinal scent of old illness and something else, something faintly, unsettlingly rotten. A lone bowl sat abandoned on the coffee table, a dried caked residue of soup clinging to its bottom, a few stray strands of dark hair pathetically adhering to the rim. One of the plush sofa cushions was deeply caved in, its expensive fabric edges visibly frayed and worn. Everything within the space felt utterly lifeless, devoid of warmth or vitality. On the wall, a large, ostentatiously framed wedding photograph hung slightly askew. In it, Joanna smiled, a stiff, unnatural contortion of her features, while Todd, her husband, stared directly into the camera lens with an expression that bore no resemblance to affection. It was a look of intense, possessive suspicion, as if he were jealously guarding a prized, but ultimately fragile, possession. I slowly, cautiously, pushed open the bedroom door. Joanna was sitting rigidly at the edge of the large, unmade bed, her back to me, motionless as a statue. Her usually lustrous dark hair was a tangled, neglected mess, draped limply over her slumped shoulders. A thick, sterile bandage was wrapped conspicuously around her right ankle, which was alarmingly, grotesquely swollen, a purplish hue blooming beneath the white gauze. Her hands clutched the heavy blanket, bunched in her lap, with a desperate, white-knuckled grip, as if it were the sole fragile tether anchoring her to safety, to sanity. "Joanna?" I whispered, my voice barely audible even to my own ears. When she finally turned her head, the sight of her face, so ravaged and haunted, almost caused me to physically recoil, to burst into unrestrained tears. Her features were gaunt, her lips utterly colorless, devoid of any natural pigment. Beneath her left eye, a sickeningly yellowing bruise, the fading remnant of a past violence, still lingered, a visible testament to her suffering. Her eyes, those once soft, expressive gray orbs, were terrifyingly empty, dulled to the flat, lifeless color of cold ash. But then, as her gaze registered my presence, as recognition dawned, that terrifying numbness, that profound vacancy, cracked. A sudden, overwhelming wave of panic rushed in to fill the void. "Mom, what are you doing here?" Her voice was hoarse, raspy, like sand scraping against parched, raw throat. I stepped forward, my heart aching, and gently, tentatively, wrapped my arms around her fragile, trembling frame. She flinched, a small, involuntary movement, pulling back slightly, her body rigid with fear. You shouldn't be here," she stammered, her eyes darting nervously towards the closed apartment door. "If he finds out, he'll lose it. He'll go crazy." "Joanna," I murmured, cupping her thin, cold face in my hands, forcing her to meet my gaze. "You're not safe here. You must not stay in this dreadful place alone any longer." She lowered her head, a broken, defeated gesture, and tears, hot and silent, began to fall, one by one, onto the back of my trembling hand. "He locks the door," she whispered, her voice a mere breath. From the outside, he unplugged the landline. "My phone. He only lets me call approved numbers. I'm only allowed to FaceTime you from the hospital because he knows there'll be other people around. That's the only reason he permits it. Why didn't you call the police, sweetheart? Why didn't you call the police, sweetheart? Why not reach out?" I tried. Her voice dropped so low, so faint. I had to... But he told them I was unstable. When the officers came, they offered me water. He'd slipped something into it. My sedatives. Then he made me sign a guardianship consent form. Said if I didn't cooperate fully, I'd be institutionalized. As she spoke, her words tumbling out in a torrent of remembered horror, she buried her face deeper into the sanctuary of the blanket, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. I was burning up with a fever that day. The nurse brought in a stack of forms. He stood right there next to me, watching my every move. I couldn't even read what I was signing, Mom. Later, when I tried to fight back, when I argued, he showed me the papers. He said I'd given him complete legal authority as my psychiatric guardian, that he could have me admitted against my will, anytime. I felt the room tilt precariously around me, a wave of nausea washing over me. He hadn't just physically assaulted her. He'd meticulously, diabolically, wrapped her in an invisible, legalistic noose, polished and insidious, cloaked in the guise of deep concern. And now, my daughter was trapped, ensnared in a cage constructed not of bars, but of carefully crafted paperwork and venomous lies. 2 weeks ago, she continued, her voice shaking uncontrollably, he pushed me down the stairs. He told the doctor I was just clumsy. But the doctor, I think he could tell. And Todd said, he said if I opened my mouth, if I told anyone, he'd have someone hurt Q. Her lips quivered, her eyes wide with a terror that was not for herself. Mom, I was so incredibly scared. I genuinely thought he might actually come after you. I didn't want anything to happen to you, not because of me. I reached up, my own hand trembling, and gently smoothed her tangled hair back from her tear-streaked face. You don't need to worry about that, sweetheart. He can't touch me. You've done everything you possibly could, Joanna. You are so much stronger than you give yourself credit for. And now, I'm here. I'm going to protect you. Her voice trembled as she added, almost as an afterthought, I went to the hospital once after that incident. But he made the doctor sign a strict confidentiality agreement. One of the nurses, though, she was kind. She slipped me a copy of the initial intake report. I hid it. My eyes sharpened, a flicker of hope igniting within me. Where is it, Joanna? Where did you hide it? She hesitated for a moment, then pointed a trembling finger toward the small, unassuming nightstand beside the bed. I quickly opened the drawer and, after a brief search, found a torn, crumpled manila folder stuffed deep in the back, concealed beneath an old, forgotten silk scarf. Inside, nestled amongst other miscellaneous papers, was a worn, creased medical report, dated precisely 2 weeks prior. It read, in stark, clinical lettering, right ankle fracture, significant bruising. Injury pattern likely caused by external force rather than simple fall. I folded it carefully, reverently, and slid it into the relative safety of my handbag. Put on some shoes, Joanna. Take my coat. We're leaving this place, right now. Now? She blinked, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and dawning hope. Yes, the sooner we're out of here, the better. Margie, my new friend, is going to create a diversion at the front desk. I slipped my own warm coat over her thin, shivering shoulders and grabbed a nearby scarf from the disheveled couch, wrapping it gently around her neck. She tried to stand, to push herself up from the bed, but cried out sharply in pain, her entire body tensing, her face contorting. I can't walk. Her voice broke, laced with despair. Mom, I can't even stand properly. I glanced at the indifferent face of the clock on the wall, hesitated for only a fraction of a second, then crouched down in front of her, my back strong and ready. I carefully, gently, lifted her onto my back. Just as we reached the comparative sanctuary of the apartment door, ready to make our escape, we heard the distinct, cheerful ding of an elevator alert from the hallway, followed immediately by a harsh, discordant buzz. The digital display above the elevator doors suddenly flashed. Out of service, maintenance. I clenched my jaw, a surge of adrenaline coursing through me, and without a word, turned toward the dimly lit, narrow stairwell. One excruciating step at a time, I carried her down. Each flight of stairs felt like hammering another agonizing nail into my already protesting spine. My arms, unaccustomed to such a burden, shook with the strain. My breath came in ragged, burning bursts. But despite the physical torment, I had never felt more resolute, more certain in my entire life. Her cheek rested heavily on my shoulder, her breath warm against my neck, and in a whisper, so faint it was barely louder than the rustle of our clothes, she murmured, I'm so sorry, Mom. I bit down hard on my inner lip, fighting back the surge of tears that threatened to overwhelm me. All I could manage, my voice choked with emotion, was, You're my daughter, Joanna. You never, ever have to apologize for needing help. And so, I carried her, my precious girl, the one whose laughter used to ring out so freely, so joyously, who was now battered and bruised, both physically and emotionally, away from the insidious thing she had been cruelly deceived into believing was a marriage. We finally reached the expansive, marble-floored lobby. I was just about to push through the heavy glass doors to freedom when the ever-vigilant front desk clerk called out, his voice laced with polite concern. "Ma'am, are you all right? You don't look so good." I forced a shaky, hopefully convincing smile. "Thanks so much for asking. This is my daughter. She just had a bit of a blood sugar drop. I'm just getting her home so she can rest." He looked as though he might press further, his brows furrowed in suspicion, until Margie, my guardian angel in a silk robe, swept in as if on cue, waving her arms with theatrical exuberance. "Susan, there you are. You finally made it out. Come on, come on. I've been waiting an absolute age," she called out, her voice full of boisterous, infectious cheer. Then she turned her full attention to the clerk, effectively grabbing his focus. "Young man, could you possibly do me a huge favor and check if my mischievous cat Mittens snuck out the back door again? You don't know how incredibly fast she is, that little rascal." While he was thus thoroughly distracted, I limped us, as quickly as my strained muscles would allow, through the revolving doors, one arm securely around Joanna's trembling back, the other guiding us steadily around the corner where our inconspicuous rental car was already waiting, a silent promise of escape. I opened the back door and gently, carefully, helped her into the seat. She clung to my arm, her eyes squeezed shut, her lips barely moving. Mom, you really came," she whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears and disbelief. I tucked the blanket I'd grabbed tighter around her shivering form and pressed a soft kiss to her cool forehead. "I swear to you, sweetheart," I vowed, my voice fierce with protective love, "no one is ever going to hurt you again. Not while I'm here." 10 minutes later, a lifetime it seemed, Todd returned to the silent, empty apartment. He was humming a jaunty, off-key tune, a bag of takeout swinging carelessly from one hand. He confidently tapped the code into the keypad and pushed the door open. "Joanna," he called out, expecting her usual timid response. No answer. He stepped further into the apartment, a flicker of irritation crossing his features. He moved into the bedroom and then froze, the takeout bag slipping from his suddenly nerveless fingers to land with a soft thud on the carpet. The heavy blanket from the bed was gone. The closet door stood wide open, revealing the stark emptiness where her clothes usually hung. Drawers were pulled out, their contents ransacked or missing. The manila report folder, the one he'd dismissed, still lay on the coffee table, but its crucial contents, the damning medical report, were conspicuously absent. His face darkened, slowly, ominously, inch by inch, his fists clenching so tightly his knuckles shone white. "Joanna!" His voice echoed through the suddenly cavernous apartment, loud, sharp, and suffused with a chilling, furious rage. But this time, there was no one to answer his summons. I drove, tirelessly, resolutely, all the way to Spring Hill. It's a place we once called home for over 20 cherished years, a town so infinitesimally small it doesn't even boast a Starbucks, but it holds the calmest, clearest skies and the most profoundly familiar, comforting air. I could navigate every winding street and turn every familiar corner with my eyes closed, the map of it etched into my very being. Joanna sat in the passenger seat, a silent, withdrawn figure for the entire journey, her face turned steadfastly toward the passing window, the wind gently tossing her dark, tangled hair. But nothing, not even the beauty of the open countryside, could lift the heavy, oppressive shadow that clung to her eyes. By the time we finally arrived at my small, welcoming house, the sky was beginning to fade into the soft, muted hues of dusk. My house is an old, unpretentious one, a simple 2-bedroom cottage that I'd lovingly fixed up myself over the years. It's simple, undeniably quiet, with a little, thriving vegetable garden in the backyard that was my pride and joy. She used to complain, in her younger, more restless days, that there was absolutely no Wi-Fi signal to be found out here. But now, standing precariously in the familiar doorway, looking like a small, wounded bird that has barely, miraculously, made it back to the safety of her nest, she said nothing at all. She just leaned heavily against the weathered doorframe and stared, for a long, contemplative while, into the comforting dimness within. I meticulously changed the bed linens, replacing them with fresh, crisp sheets, and prepared her favorite creamy chicken soup, the exact way she'd adored it as a child, rich and comforting. She managed one small bowl, nothing more. That night, she didn't retreat to the solitude of the guest bedroom. Instead, she curled up, small and vulnerable, on the old, overstuffed sofa in the corner of my own room, wrapped tightly in a thick woolen blanket, and finally, blessedly, fell asleep. Around midnight, I was startled awake by the faint, distressing sound of her murmuring in her troubled sleep. I moved closer, my heart aching, straining to discern her fragmented words. Her voice was faint, broken, laced with a raw, palpable fear. Don't lock the door. I promise I won't run." I sat down quietly beside her on the floor, took her cold, trembling hand in mine, and remained there, a silent, unwavering sentinel, for the rest of the long, dark night, without once closing my own eyes. The next morning, I took her to the small, familiar community clinic in town. The nurse on duty was Tracy, an old, dear friend of mine, a woman with a tongue as sharp as a razor, but instincts even sharper, and someone I trusted implicitly, with my very life. "You actually brought her back home," she muttered, her voice low and grim, as she pulled on a pair of sterile latex gloves. "I just saw her charming husband plastered all over Facebook a few days ago, posting those disgustingly devoted husband pics like he's some kind of damn modern-day saint. All lies, Tracy." "Every single bit of it," I said, my voice flat and weary. Tracy rolled her eyes with undisguised contempt. I could tell he was utter trash from a mile off. Guys like that? Narcissism practically oozes from every pore, in every swaggering step they take. She carefully, gently, examined Joanna's swollen, discolored ankle, and her usually jovial expression turned unmistakably grim. "This isn't a simple sprain, Madison. This is indicative of direct trauma. Blunt force, most likely sustained from a significant fall, or being pushed. Your daughter didn't just trip. Someone nudged this to her." I nodded, meeting her knowing gaze. "I didn't hide anything from you, Tracy. I desperately need your help. I need to find concrete proof. She was treated, however briefly, at Cedar Falls Memorial. I want her records." She raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Not through the conventional front door, you won't. Not without her explicit written consent, and I doubt he'd ever allow that." A thoughtful pause. "But I can poke around the system's edges, see what might be, hanging out in the less guarded corners." I handed her the torn, crumpled medical report I'd retrieved from Joanna's nightstand. She bent over it, her brow furrowed in concentration, her fingers carefully tracing along the frayed edges of the paper. "The intake code matches. This was definitely issued by Cedar Falls Memorial Neurosurgery Department from the look of this specific coding." My heart momentarily stopped, a cold dread gripping me. Neurosurgery? Joanna hadn't mentioned anything about that. Tracy frowned, noticing my reaction. "Do you want me to try and reach out to the attending physician? I can probably dig up a name from the system." I leaned closer, lowering my voice. "Do you know anyone there, Tracy? Someone on the inside who might be willing to help. Off the official books." She gave me a shrewd, sideways glance, then lowered her own voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "My cousin Sarah, transferred there last year, works the main front desk in the ER admissions. Not high up, but she sees a lot. I'll see what I can discreetly pull out of her." I felt as though I could finally, tentatively breathe again, a small measure of relief, easing the suffocating tightness in my chest. "I just need anything. Records, dates, prescription names, even just a blurry screenshot if that's all she can manage. If I can get that, I can take it to a lawyer." Tracy nodded, her expression resolute. "Just be incredibly careful, Madison. If that man has half a brain, he'll start trying to trace your movements too. I gripped the torn report tighter in my hand, my knuckles white, and said, my voice flat and cold as ice, then let's just see who moves faster. Tracy, true to her word, kept her promise. By the following afternoon, she sent me a terse text message. There's a record. Per my source, intake and imaging data Guerra in the system. My cousin snagged a screenshot, sending it now. I was sitting on the old wooden bench in my sun-dappled backyard when I opened the message, my hands trembling so violently I could barely hold the phone steady. As the image slowly loaded, pixel by agonizing pixel, my breath caught in my throat. It was grainy, slightly out of focus, but I didn't need it to be razor-sharp. I recognized Joanna's name and the date instantly. It corresponded to the exact week she had tearfully told me, over a crackling phone line, that she'd just slipped and fallen on some loose stairs. The screenshot clearly showed a scheduled CT scan, marked with the ominous annotation, incomplete, patient left, Amadai. I didn't need to ask why. Todd would never have permitted her to go through with that potentially revealing test. What did it signify? It meant her injuries, the true extent of them, had never been fully, officially documented. But the hospital system, blessedly, retained a registration record, an electronic footprint. And that, I prayed, would be enough. I immediately told Tracy to try and get in touch with the doctor who had initially seen Joanna in the ER, and implore them to ask if they'd be willing to call me, even for a brief, unofficial conversation. That evening, as I was listlessly stirring a pot of soup, my phone rang, an unfamiliar number flashing on the screen. Hello? Is this Joanna Miller's mother? The voice on the other end was calm, measured, undeniably professional, yet imbued with an unexpected undercurrent of gentleness. This is Dr. Patrick, from the Cedar Falls Memorial ER. I was the attending physician on duty the night your daughter was brought in. Your daughter stated at the time that she had fallen, but frankly, we harbored significant suspicions about possible domestic violence. Her demeanor was evasive, and she adamantly refused to name anyone involved, or even allude to another party. So we were only able to log her preliminary. I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. That preliminary report, doctor. Is there any conceivable way I could obtain a copy of it? He paused, a brief, thoughtful silence. Officially, as I'm sure you understand, only the patient herself can request such medical records, and that requires a signed release form. Another pause. However, I understand your delicate situation. I can prepare an informal treatment summary. Just a basic handwritten note describing her presenting condition and our initial findings. It won't carry any significant legal weight, unfortunately, but it will be something. I understand, doctor, I said, a wave of profound gratitude washing over me. That's all I need for now. That would be more than enough. I'll write it out by hand, on my personal stationery, he said, his voice conveying a quiet solidarity. And I'll fax it directly to a number you provide. No hospital system involvement, no official channels. I knew what that unspoken offer meant. He was taking a personal, professional risk for us, for Joanna. I gave him Tracy's secure home fax number and thanked him with all the sincerity I could muster. As I ended the call, I finally felt the smallest, most fragile breath of genuine relief ease through my constricted chest. But at that very same moment, miles away in the sterile luxury of his Cedar Falls apartment, Todd stood frozen, stock still, in the middle of his meticulously tidy living room, his handsome face a mask of cold, unyielding granite. The apartment had been systematically torn apart, a scene of frantic, desperate searching. Drawers gaped open like silent, accusing mouths. Couch cushions were flipped and slashed. The floorboards under the bed had been swept clean with a brutal efficiency. But the one crucial thing he was desperately looking for, the damning medical report he had sworn Joanna was never, ever allowed to copy or possess, was gone. Vanished. He snatched his phone from the charger and dialed the building's security office, his voice low, seething with a barely suppressed rage. Didn't you assure me this building had comprehensive 24-hour surveillance? He snarled. Pull the footage. Tuesday night, between 8 and 9 p.m. I want to see precisely who came through that main front entrance, and more importantly, who went down my hallway." He hung up without waiting for a reply, and his gaze fell upon a forgotten sticky note stuck to the side of the kitchen counter, a string of digits scribbled in faded blue ink. Familiar, yet not quite his own. That number. Joanna had mentioned it once, in passing, a casual remark he'd barely registered at the time. In case Mom ever needs to come visit, I gave her a guest code. Todd's eyes went cold, hard as chips of ice. He strode to his laptop, his movements quick and decisive, searched for Susan Dawson, mother of Joanna Miller, and cross-referenced her sparse online registration information. Spring Hill. Seconds later, he walked out the door, a grim, determined set to his jaw. When I stepped back inside my quiet, sanctuary-like house, Joanna was curled up on the old, comfortable couch, wrapped in a thick woolen blanket, her gaze fixed on the darkening world outside the window. There was something subtly, yet noticeably, clearer in her eyes now, less fog, less raw, abject fear. When she saw me, she asked softly, her voice still fragile, "Mom, are you okay?" I sat down beside her, my heart swelling with a fierce, protective love, and carefully pulled out the grainy screenshot Tracy had sent. "Sweetheart," I said, my voice gentle but firm, "we just got our very first piece of tangible evidence." She didn't say anything, just leaned over slowly and rested her head on my shoulder, a silent acknowledgement, a shared moment of fragile hope. "We've still got a long, arduous road ahead of us," I whispered, stroking her hair. "But I promise you this, Joanna, you're not walking it alone anymore." She nodded gently against my shoulder and murmured, so faintly I almost didn't hear it, "Thank you, Ma." I was just about to say something else, something reassuring, when my phone buzzed insistently in my pocket. It was a text message from Margie, my unexpected ally. "A strange man called my house just now. Said he was looking for your daughter. His tone was, very odd." She didn't mention a name, but she didn't need to. I knew, with a chilling certainty, it was Todd. He was moving faster than I'd anticipated. I didn't show Joanna the message. She had only just begun to tentatively eat again, to sleep through the night without waking in a cold, paralyzing panic. I wasn't going to drag her back into that abyss of fear. Not yet. Instead, I calmly, deliberately, put the phone away, stood up, and moved through the house, systematically closing every curtain, shutting out the encroaching darkness. I locked the sturdy kitchen door, then leaned into the heavy front door, and through the old, reassuringly solid deadbolt. This modest house didn't boast any fancy, modern security systems, but when it came to the primal instinct of keeping danger at bay, every resonant click of heavy metal was its own unique, profound kind of comfort. Then, I walked purposefully to my bedroom, opened an old, cedar-lined storage box tucked away in the back of the closet, and dug through its contents until my fingers brushed against the familiar worn cover of a weathered address book. I flipped through the fragile, yellowed pages until I found the name I was searching for, Dr. Patrick. I dialed the number listed, my hand surprisingly steady. It went straight to his private voicemail, his personal inbox.to. I left a clear, concise message. "Hello, Dr. Patrick. This is Joanna Miller's mother, Susan Dawson. I've just received a rather unsettling warning from a friend. It appears someone is actively looking for us. I can't be certain if he'll attempt to contact you directly, but if he does, please, I implore you, tell him you have no authorization whatsoever to release any medical information pertaining to my daughter. You once says you would help. It's an ordinary tone." As I hung up the phone, I realized my palm was slick with cold sweat. The next morning, I pretended, for Joanna's sake, that everything was perfectly normal, an ordinary day. I made breakfast just as I always did. When I fried the eggs, I added an extra generous pinch of black pepper. Joanna had only ever liked them that specific way as a child, a small, forgotten detail I suddenly, vividly remembered. And while the coffee brewed, its rich aroma filling the small kitchen, I tapped the lid of the percolator a little louder than absolutely necessary, just enough of a familiar domestic sound to let her hear me moving about in the kitchen. Just enough to remind her, subtly, that someone was still here, a constant, reassuring presence, that she wasn't alone. She emerged from her room a little later, wearing a new, soft sweater I'd laid out for her. She looked marginally better, still undeniably weary, the shadows still lurking beneath her eyes, but discernibly steadier on her feet. "Mom," she said slowly, her voice hesitant, I've been thinking, maybe I should report him, officially." I paused, the breakfast plate halfway to the table, caught completely off guard by her sudden declaration. Are you absolutely sure, sweetheart?" She nodded, then immediately shook her head, a visible conflict warring within her. I don't know. I know that running away isn't the ultimate answer. But I'm so incredibly scared, Mom. If I do report him, I'm terrified he'll just get worse." I sat down beside her at the small kitchen table, my voice low but infused with a quiet firmness. "You don't have to make that monumental decision today, Joanna. Not right now. But there is one thing I can help you do, one proactive step we can take. We're going to meticulously gather everything, every single piece of potential evidence, every note, every memory. We'll seal it all in an envelope, put it somewhere incredibly safe, so that when you are ready, whether that means calling the police or Her eyes filled, just slightly, a soft, bruised redness creeping around the delicate rims. Did something happen?" she asked in a small, fearful whisper. "You feel different today, Mom. More intense." I hesitated for a fraction of a second, then offered her a different, gentler truth. "Nothing has happened, sweetheart. You are perfectly safe here. I promise you that with all my heart. You just leave the rest of the worrying to me." She didn't push further, didn't question my carefully chosen words. She just stepped forward, her movement still tentative, and wrapped her arms around me in a fierce, desperate hug. And for a long, quiet, profoundly significant second, we just held on, mother and daughter, two souls clinging together in the storm. Meanwhile, miles away, in the very center of the seemingly tranquil town of Spring Hill, a nondescript gray sedan crept slowly, almost predatorily, down Main Street. Todd sat rigidly behind the wheel, one arm resting casually on the open window frame, his sharp, calculating eyes scanning the sleepy storefronts and tree-lined sidewalks with an unnerving intensity. He'd spent the entire morning surreptitiously asking around, trying to pinpoint my address, not directly, of course. He was far too cunning for that. He'd circled the small town twice, meticulously learning its layout, observing the ebb and flow of its quiet life. Outside the local pharmacy, he spotted me stepping out, a small white paper bag containing first aid supplies clutched in my hand. He didn't get out of the car. He simply raised his phone, almost imperceptibly, and snapped a quick, surreptitious photo. Then, he opened his messaging app and rapidly typed, "She's in Spring Hill, confirmed." But, for some inscrutable reason, he didn't send the message. Instead, he paused, his thumb hovering over the send button, then deliberately, slowly, deleted it. That evening, after a simple, quiet dinner, I sat down beside Joanna on the sofa and said, my voice carefully casual, "Sweetheart, I called my cousin Clara today. She has that lovely little guest house out near Eugene, Oregon. Remember? There happens to be a vacancy this week. It's a wonderfully quiet place, beautiful, peaceful views. I thought perhaps you could go there for a few days, just to get some complete—" Joanna paused, her fork halfway to her mouth, a flicker of unease in her eyes. You want me to leave Spring Hill?" "No, not permanently. Just for a little while," I said, my hands already beginning to instinctively fold some of her clothes into a small overnight bag. I don't feel entirely right letting you stay here any longer, not with things as they are." She frowned, a line of worry creasing her forehead. "But didn't you say Spring Hill was safe? That we were safe here?" I wasn't lying, not entirely. I looked her directly in the eyes, my gaze steady. "It is safe, sweetheart. But sometimes the safest, Most familiar places are also, unfortunately, the easiest ones to find. She hesitated, her gaze searching mine, clearly wanting to argue, to protest. But in the end, after a long silent moment, she just nodded, a small, reluctant acquiescence. "What about you, Mom?" I managed a faint, hopefully reassuring smile. "Oh, I'll stay behind for a bit. Tie up some loose ends, you know? That's always been my specialty, hasn't it?" She stared at me, a complex mixture of emotions swirling in her eyes, as if she wanted to challenge me, to demand the full truth. But ultimately, she just nodded again, her shoulders slumping slightly. The next morning, I booked her a bus ticket to Eugene, using a neighbor's name and paying in cash, leaving no discernible trail. When Joanna stepped onto the bus, her small bag clutched in her hand, I stood at the curb, waving with a forced brightness until the large vehicle finally disappeared around the distant corner. Only then did I allow my smile to falter, did I turn and walk away. But I didn't head back to the deceptive quiet of my home. Instead, I crossed the street to an old, familiar cafe, tucked away beside the town's hardware store. The owner, Michael, was an old high school classmate of mine, retired now from his city job, running the place with a quiet, unassuming efficiency and a remarkably long, accurate memory. I leaned in close to the counter, my voice low. "Michael, did anyone happen to see a gray sedan around town today? License plate possibly ending in 623? He looked up from wiping down the counter, his expression thoughtful. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, matter of fact, I did. Parked directly across from your place this morning. Stayed there for about 15, maybe 20 minutes. Did the driver come to the door?" I asked, my heart pounding. "Nope, didn't see him get out, but I did see someone, looked like the same car, follow your daughter for about half a block after she left your house." I let that chilling piece of information sit, heavy and ominous, for a long moment. "Then," I said, my voice surprisingly steady, "Thank you, Michael. I appreciate it." As I stepped out of the cafe and into the bright, indifferent sunlight, I realized something profound. My footsteps were steady, sure. I wasn't running anymore. I had done what absolutely needed to be done to protect Joanna. And now, I was ready. That evening, I watered my thriving vegetable garden, just as I did every other evening. The sun was hanging low in the sky, painting the clouds in breathtaking hues of lavender and rose, the air quiet and still. And that's when Todd finally, inevitably, showed up. He was wearing a wrinkled, ill-fitting shirt, his usually immaculate appearance slightly disheveled. He stood just outside the low picket fence, his voice, when he called my name, surprisingly soft, almost conciliatory. "Susan?" I turned, my expression carefully, deliberately, emotionless. "We need to talk," he said, his gaze intense. I slowly dried my hands on a faded cotton rag and walked over to the fence, purposefully keeping its fragile wooden barrier between us. My voice, when I spoke, was remarkably calm, utterly devoid of tremor. "You're looking for my daughter, Joanna." He managed a small, unconvincing smile. "I'm just concerned for her well-being, Susan, naturally." "She's safe," I stated evenly, my gaze unwavering. "You took her?" he accused, his voice rising slightly. "Without telling me. You didn't go through the police, didn't notify any official channels. That could be considered kidnapping, you know. Illegal detainment, interfering with the care of a mentally unstable adult." I refused to take the bait, refused to be drawn into his manipulative games. I cut him off, my voice as steady and unyielding as stone. "Have you ever once stopped to ask yourself, why she didn't tell you where she was going, Todd?" His fabricated smile faltered, flickered. "She doesn't want to see you. She's afraid of you, profoundly afraid." I took a deliberate step closer to the fence, my eyes boring into his. "You actually think I don't know what you did to her? What you put her through? You don't have any proof," he said, his voice low now, laced with a dangerous undercurrent. "Are you absolutely certain about that, Todd?" I challenged. For the briefest, almost imperceptible second, something flickered in his eyes, a fleeting glimpse of raw, unadulterated panic, before it was quickly, expertly buried beneath a thick veneer of arrogance. "You're just her mother," he sneered, his lip curling. "A retired housewife from a hick town. You can't possibly beat me." I held his gaze, my voice never wavering, never betraying the tremor of fear I felt deep inside. "I don't have to beat you, Todd. I just have to make you lose." He stared at me for a long, tense moment, his jaw twitching, a small, involuntary tick that might have been the precursor to a smirk, or perhaps the clenching of a suppressed threat. Then, without another word, he turned abruptly and walked away. I stood there, motionless, until his nondescript gray sedan turned out of the quiet alley and disappeared down the long, empty street. Only then, when he was truly gone, did I finally allow myself to exhale a long, shuddering release of pent-up tension. Back inside the comforting sanctuary of my house, the faxed letter from Dr. Patrick was sitting neatly on the kitchen table, where Tracy had left it for me. The paper was already beginning to show the faint, telltale signs of yellowing at the edges, but the doctor's handwriting was crisp, clear, and undeniably legible. Patient, Joanna Miller. Diagnosis: suspected domestic abuse, multiple contusions, and bone fractures noted. Inconsistent with patient's stated cause of injury. Recommend urgent psychiatric evaluation and consideration for independent guardianship. I folded it carefully, reverently, slid it into a clear, protective plastic bag, and locked it securely inside the bottom drawer of my desk. Next came the step I had been meticulously, anxiously preparing for: filing an official police report. I stood outside the surprisingly modern, brick-faced police station, the plastic evidence bag clutched tightly in my hand. The late afternoon sunlight pressed down on my skin with an almost physical weight, but I felt no discernible warmth, only a chilling resolve. I took a deep, steadying breath and pushed open the heavy glass door. Behind the imposing front desk sat a youngish officer, perhaps in his early 30s, with the weary, world-weary look of someone who had endured far too many long, thankless shifts. His name tag read, Officer Reed. "Ma'am, can I help you with something?" he asked, his tone polite but neutral. I placed the plastic bag carefully on the polished counter and said, my voice calm but unwavering, infused with a steely determination, "Yes, officer. I'm here to report a case of domestic abuse and illegal surveillance. The victim is my daughter, Joanna Miller. The abuser is her husband, Todd Miller. The abuser is her husband." He glanced down at the contents visible inside the clear bag, the doctor's diagnostic summary, the grainy system screenshot of her air intake, a meticulously written statement from Tracy, the local nurse. "Everything here," I continued, "points to a sustained pattern of long-term abuse and profound psychological control." He nodded slowly, removed the documents from the bag, and began reviewing them, page by painstaking page, his expression unreadable, as if he were trying to meticulously assess whether the narrative they presented held together, whether it rang true. "Where's she now?" he asked, his gaze lifting to meet mine. "She's staying with family, in a safe, undisclosed place," I replied. "She's willing to cooperate fully with any investigation, but she's not yet emotionally ready to return to the scene, to Cedar Falls." He frowned, a slight furrow appearing between his brows. "You understand, ma'am, that without her direct personal statement, and ultimately her signature on a formal complaint, none of this, compelling as it may seem, is legally sufficient to file formal charges. These documents certainly support a potential case, but they do not, in themselves, constitute a case." I bit down hard on my lower lip, a surge of frustration rising within me. "Did you actually reading that summary from Dr. Patrick?" The doctor explicitly, unequivocally wrote, "Suspected domestic abuse." And in domestic cases, as I'm sure you can appreciate, the lines can often be complicated. My voice dropped an octave, becoming quiet, dangerously cold. "Her ankle was fractured, officer, when he violently pushed her down a flight of stairs. Her face required stitches under her eye from another accident. She wakes up in the middle of the night, whimpering. Please don't lock the door. Does that sound particularly complicated to you? He paused, glancing around the station to ensure they were alone, then lowered his voice significantly. "I'm not saying I don't believe you, ma'am. Personally, I do. But per strict departmental protocol, we require more substantial, direct evidence. I can open an initial situation report based on what you've provided. If you can get her to call us, we can record her statement over the phone, and that can be officially attached to this file. If the hospital in Cedar Falls cooperates fully as well, provides her officially attached to this file. I nodded, a sliver of hope returning. She'll call. I'll make absolutely sure she calls. Today. By the time I stepped out of the police station and back into the oppressive afternoon heat, the back of my shirt was soaked through with nervous perspiration. I climbed into my car and immediately dialed Joanna's temporary number in Eugene. Her voice, when she answered, was surprisingly steadier than I had expected. Mom? Did you file the report? I did, sweetheart. I gave them everything I possibly could. They haven't officially opened a case yet, not formally, but they are willing to document your phone call to take your statement. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then she said, her voice quiet but resolute, I'll do it, Mom. Tell me exactly what I need to say, and I'll say it. I went silent for a beat, a wave of profound pride washing over me. She used to dread phone calls, especially any that involved confrontation or officialdom, any mention of Todd. But now, she was willing to speak, willing to finally be heard. You don't have to say what we tell you, Joanna, I said softly, my voice thick with emotion. You just have to tell them the truth, your truth. Across the state, in a dimly lit alley behind a noisy bar in Cedar Falls, Todd sat hunched over, gripping his phone so tightly it looked as though it might shatter in his hand. He had just gotten off a curt, uninformative call with the hospital's administrative office. The voice on the other end had been distant, impeccably polite, but undeniably firm. Mr. Miller, we have been contacted by law enforcement regarding your wife, Joanna Miller's, recent visit. Please be advised that all related documentation is currently being preserved under legal hold. Nothing can be altered, removed, or accessed without explicit court order. His jaw clenched, a muscle twitching violently in his cheek. He knew now with a sickening certainty that Susan, that meddling old woman, was making her move, systematically dismantling his carefully constructed world. But he wouldn't go down quietly, not without a fight. Early the next morning, Joanna made the call to the Spring Hill police station. Her voice trembled slightly in the official recording, a faint tremor of lingering fear. But every word she uttered rang with an undeniable, heartbreaking clarity. This is Joanna Miller. My husband, Todd Miller, has subjected me to repeated instances of physical and emotional abuse. He locked me in a room. He cut me off from all contact with the outside world. He didn't allow me to keep a personal phone, regularly deleted my call history. He controlled my medical records, access to doctors, and threatened that if I ever went to the police, something terrible would happen to my mom. I sat beside her in the quiet guest house in Eugene as she spoke, listening to every painful, courageous second of her testimony. Her facial muscles twitched at times, her jaw clenched with the effort of recounting the trauma, but she didn't stop, didn't falter. I am currently staying with my mother's relatives at an undisclosed location. I am safe for now. I am willing to cooperate fully with the investigation and hereby authorize the police to access all of my medical records from Cedar Falls Memorial and any other relevant institution. On the other end of the line, Officer Reed's tone shifted perceptibly, losing its earlier professional detachment. Thank you, Ms. Miller. We'll update the file immediately and submit a formal request for preliminary approval of a protective order. When it was over, when the call was disconnected, Joanna turned to me, her eyes glistening with unshed tears, and said, her voice thick with a newfound strength, Mom, you gave me the courage. I'm done hiding. I'm not going back into that shell ever again. Meanwhile, back at Cedar Falls Memorial Hospital, Dr. Patrick, true to his word and his conscience, had already submitted a full, legally sound medical summary to the hospital's internal legal department. This time, the file was unequivocally marked legally admissible and, crucially, included Joanna's authorized electronic signature, obtained via a secure portal. It contained her air imaging scans, detailed nurse logs, the physician's comprehensive written assessment, and, most critically, a brief audio recording of their conversation that fateful night in the ER, a recording in which Joanna clearly, if fearfully, stated, "My husband, he pushed me." Todd's earlier, manipulative attempt to request Joanna's medical records under false pretenses was also meticulously documented and appended as part of the now official report, painting a damning picture of his attempts to control and obstruct. That complete, irrefutable file was faxed directly to the Spring Hill Police Department at precisely 4:30 that afternoon. Officer Reed called me back almost immediately. "Mrs. Dawson," he said, his voice holding a new note of respect, "we've received the formal medical report from Cedar Falls Memorial, along with a recording of your daughter's official statement. We've submitted all compiled materials to our higher office. The police will now launch an official full-scale investigation into Todd Miller. And I'm pleased to inform you a temporary protective order has been issued by the court. And I'm pleased to inform you a tentative from company." I didn't speak at first. Couldn't speak. I just exhaled, a long, deep, shuddering breath, as if I'd been holding it in for weeks, for months, for years. "Thank you, officer," I finally whispered, my voice choked. "Don't thank me, Mrs. Dawson," he said, a hint of warmth in his tone. "This happened because you didn't give up. You protected your daughter, and ultimately, yourself." That evening, a uniformed courier from the station delivered the official protection order documents to my door. I called Joanna immediately with the momentous news. That same night, she boarded a bus from Eugene and came home, back to Spring Hill, back to me. Later, after she had settled in, I sat alone at the kitchen table and opened a bottle of good red wine, a bottle I hadn't touched in years, saving it for a truly special occasion. Joanna walked in quietly from the living room, her presence a comforting warmth. I looked up at her, a soft, proud light in my eyes. "Today, Joanna," I said, my voice gentle, "you told the truth, in your own voice. For the very first time, in a long, long time." She froze for a second, her eyes widening slightly. Then a slow, tentative smile spread across her face. I gently slid a clean wine glass across the polished table to her. We both smiled, a shared, unspoken understanding passing between us. And together, mother and daughter, survivors, we raised our glasses in a silent, heartfelt toast. The day Todd Miller received the official summons from the police, detailing the charges and the impending investigation, happened to be his 37th birthday. Word had it, through the small-town grapevine that Margie so expertly cultivated, that he'd planned an extravagant celebration, intending to take a select group of influential friends out for an expensive dinner that evening. He was, apparently, going to announce his upcoming, lucrative investment in a flashy new tech startup, a calculated, ostentatious move designed to mark a new, successful chapter in his life. But around noon, a uniformed officer, stern-faced and implacable, showed up at the glass-fronted door of his prestigious office and handed him a thick document, officially sealed in conspicuous red. "Mr. Miller," the officer said calmly, his voice devoid of inflection, "you are currently under active investigation for domestic violence, psychological abuse, and medical record tampering. We are formally requesting your full and immediate cooperation." Todd didn't explode, not then, not publicly. He froze for a few terrifying seconds, the color draining from his face, then let out a cold, flat, dismissive laugh. "She's making it all up. She's unstable. You're basing this entire charade on an informal, hearsay report, for God's sake." "The report in question, Mr. Miller, has since been officially amended, certified, and legally attested to by the attending physician," the officer replied evenly, his gaze unwavering. "In addition, your wife, Ms. Joanna Miller, authorized full disclosure of all her medical records in a recorded, legally binding phone call with our department. Several corroborating documents now point to a consistent, deeply disturbing pattern of abuse." Todd said nothing further. His arrogant gaze dropped, his fists clenched so tight at his sides that his knuckles turned a stark, bloodless white. This time, there would be no talking his way out of it, no silencing the truth with his practiced charm or manipulative control. The very ground was shifting, crumbling beneath his feet, and he was utterly powerless to stop it. Meanwhile, Joanna and I sat in a quiet, sunlit meeting room on the third floor of a downtown law office. She wore a soft, cream-colored cotton blouse, her dark hair tied back neatly in a low ponytail. There was still a faint trace of residual pallor in her face, a lingering shadow in her eyes, but she sat straighter now, more composed, more present than she had been in weeks, perhaps years. Across from us sat Miss Harper, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney with intelligent eyes and a reputation for tenacity. Tracy had connected us with her. She specialized exclusively in complex domestic abuse cases and, true to her reputation, didn't waste a single word. After flipping quickly, efficiently, through our carefully compiled stack of documents, she looked up, her gaze direct and assessing. The police have already successfully secured a temporary restraining order, which is excellent, she stated. Once the district attorney's office officially files charges, which I anticipate will happen swiftly given this evidence, we can vigorously pursue civil action. This will include damages for severe emotional distress and a formal request to freeze a significant portion of his known assets. Joanna spoke then, her voice soft but clear. Will I have to go to court? Miss Harper nodded, her expression reassuring. Probably yes, just for one, perhaps two, preliminary hearings. You won't need to speak in extensive detail, Joanna. Just confirm your identity and your continued willingness to provide evidence and cooperate with the prosecution. I reached over and gently squeezed her hand, offering silent support. You're not doing any of this alone, sweetheart. Joanna looked at me, her eyes glassy with unshed emotion, but the tears didn't fall. Not this time. A week later, the local Cedar Falls News, and even a few regional outlets, picked up the burgeoning story. The headline, stark and sensational, read, "Suspected coercive abuse case enters legal process. Mother helps daughter escape controlling relationship." They didn't explicitly name Todd Miller in the initial reports, citing ongoing investigation protocols, but anyone who knew him, anyone familiar with his carefully cultivated public persona, instantly recognized the blurred profile photo that accompanied the article. His stiff, arrogant jawline, that signature expensive overcoat, the distinct side angle, it was unmistakably, undeniably him. That evening, my phone rang. It was Margie, her voice bubbling with an almost palpable excitement and vindication. "I knew he wasn't right," she said triumphantly. "I told you, Susan. I'm so incredibly glad the truth is finally coming out into the light, and seeing your daughter safe, seeing her start to hell. Susan, I'm just so incredibly proud of you, of what you did." I smiled into the receiver, a genuine, warm smile. "Thank you for sending that warning message when you did, Margie. If it hadn't been for your quick thinking, your intuition, I might have been too late." She clicked her tongue dismissively. "Nonsense. Next time you're filing official hero paperwork, Susan, make sure you include a nomination for Neighborhood Watch MVP, all right?" We both laughed, a shared, genuine laughter that for once wasn't a mask for fear or anxiety, but a pure expression of relief and camaraderie. Todd Miller didn't get away with it, not in the end. The police, armed with search warrants, found several incriminating emails in his work inbox, damning messages he'd sent to administrative staff at Cedar Falls Memorial, subtly pressuring them to correct or remove what he termed inaccurate records, and even, in one particularly egregious instance, offering thinly veiled compensation in exchange for their cooperation. Those emails became key, irrefutable evidence for the prosecution, unequivocally confirming his deliberate attempt to obstruct a criminal investigation. With Joanna's formal, detailed statement added to the rapidly growing case file, the police submitted a full, unreserved recommendation to prosecute to the district attorney's office. The court approved it without hesitation. The trial, when it eventually happened, didn't drag on for long. At the preliminary hearing, Todd's expensive, high-powered attorney attempted to spin the horrific events as mere emotional conflict and accidental harm stemming from a passionate but troubled marriage. But that flimsy defense collapsed quickly, spectacularly, when confronted with the irrefutable weight of the official medical records the detailed diagnostic summaries, the recorded phone calls, and a tight, consistent, meticulously documented timeline of abuse. Every excuse, every carefully constructed lie, fell apart under scrutiny. He didn't go to prison, much to my initial vengeful disappointment. But he was sentenced to 2 years of strict probation, mandatory intensive psychological counseling, and severe public behavior restrictions. His real, more lasting punishment, however, came from elsewhere. The wealthy investors in his much-hyped tech venture abruptly pulled out, severing all ties. The board of directors at his company swiftly, unceremoniously, voted him off. His once buzzing social media profiles, previously filled with fawning friends and influential business contacts, went eerily silent overnight. Some former associates even went so far as to delete any existing photos that included him, erasing him from their digital histories entirely. No prison bars, no clanging cell doors, just the slow, inexorable public erasure of a man who had arrogantly, fatally believed he was untouchable. Joanna didn't attend the trial that day. She sat instead in the tranquil quiet of my backyard, the warm morning sun touching the vibrant, wild-growing flowers at her feet. She texted me, a simple message. "Mom, I couldn't bear to watch him fall apart, to see him face that. But knowing you're there, representing us, that's enough for me. More than enough." I replied instantly. "You're alive, sweetheart. You're free. That's the only victory that truly matters." When spring arrived, breathing new life into the world, we moved. Not to hide, not to disappear from the world, but simply to start walking in a new, hopeful direction. It was a quiet, unassuming little house, nestled near the edge of a sprawling, ancient forest, with a small, sun-drenched balcony where the morning light fell just right, warm and inviting. Joanna began taking online courses in trauma counseling, slowly, painstakingly, rebuilding a gentle, sustainable rhythm to her days. I signed up as a volunteer at the local town library. Sometimes I read stories to captivated groups of children, their eyes wide with wonder. Sometimes I just quietly shelved books, the repetitive, tactile motion, a soothing balm to my own soul. Both activities, in their own way, felt like a profound form of healing. One sun-drenched afternoon, Joanna and I were out buying groceries at the local market. On the sidewalk ahead, we saw a young boy, no older than 10, diligently holding a brightly colored umbrella over his mother, shielding her from a sudden spring shower. The umbrella was comically too small for both of them. He was getting half-soaked himself, his hair plastered to his forehead, while his mother remained perfectly dry beneath its inadequate shelter. I glanced over at Joanna. She was watching the boy too, a soft, contemplative expression on her face. Then she smiled, a genuine, gentle, unforced smile, the kind I hadn't seen grace her lips in years. And in that single fleeting moment, I knew she had truly come back. Not just in body, but in spirit. The real Joanna, the kind, clear-eyed, quietly strong, resilient girl I remembered with such fierce love. People sometimes ask me, in hushed, curious tones, "How did you do it, Susan? How did you know?" I always tell them the same thing. I didn't do anything particularly extraordinary. I don't possess a law degree. I've never been an active part of any formal women's rights group or advocacy organization. I'm not wealthy by any stretch of the imagination, nor am I powerful or influential in any conventional sense. I live a quiet life in a small, unassuming town, and I'm just a mother. But I had one crucial, unwavering thing. I never, ever stopped believing her. Even when the world, or at least her carefully manipulated corner of it, tried to label her as dramatic, or overly fragile, or emotionally unstable, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that she wasn't crazy. She was profoundly, deeply hurt. She wasn't broken beyond repair. She was, with incredible courage, surviving. Me? I'm not a hero. I'm just someone who stood steadfastly behind her, a silent, unwavering presence, and simply didn't leave. I'm Joanna, and I woke up in the sunlight. The curtains were thrown wide open, a deliberate act by Mom, I was sure, and the light, soft and warm, poured into the small room, falling across the patterned blanket and onto the floor in scattered gentle patches, like a quiet, persistent reminder. You're still here, eh? It took me a few disoriented seconds to fully register that I was lying somewhere intrinsically safe, a sensation so foreign it felt almost dreamlike. The room was small, its walls painted a calming, neutral white. There were no harsh overhead ceiling fixtures, just a cheerful row of small potted plants arranged along the wide windowsill, their little green leaves pressing eagerly outward, reaching towards the life-giving light. A cool, fresh breeze slipped lazily through the slight crack in the window. Cool, but not biting, not oppressive. I sat up slowly, cautiously, my neck a little stiff from an unfamiliar pillow. Mom must have swapped it in sometime last night, I thought with a surge of warmth. Just like her, to think of even those minute, unspoken comforts. I slid my feet over the edge of the bed, the polished wooden floor cool and smooth beneath my bare skin. Not cold in the way that used to make my entire body tense up in anticipation of displeasure, but cool in a way that simply, pleasantly, reminded me that I was barefoot and grounded, and blessedly, miraculously, alive. I reached down and slipped on a pair of thick, fluffy socks Mom had left for me, careful to make as little noise as possible, an ingrained habit, as if someone, somewhere nearby, might snap awake and become instantly, unpredictably angry. Then I remembered, with a jolt that was part relief, part lingering sorrow. It's just me and Mom here now. No, Todd. No one to scowl at me for daring to turn on the light too early. No one to snap, his voice dripping with accusation. Are you deliberately trying to get my attention? No one to suddenly, violently, rise from the couch, grab my wrist in a bruising grip, and demand. His eyes cold and hard. Where the hell were you? No one to force me, again and again, through gritted teeth and veiled threats, to meticulously explain that I had merely, innocently, taken out the trash. I sat there, on the edge of the unfamiliar, yet comforting bed, and just listened. From the direction of the kitchen, I could hear the gentle, rhythmic clatter of lids and pans, the soft, promising hiss of a kettle just beginning to boil, and the low, almost inaudible hum of Mom singing quietly, contentedly, under her breath as she moved about. And suddenly, unexpectedly, I wanted to cry. Not from sadness, not anymore, but from something profoundly unfamiliar, something tight and constricted in my chest that was finally, tentatively, loosening, pushing outward. Relief, perhaps. Maybe even peace. I genuinely didn't think I'd ever wake up to a morning like this again. A morning filled with such simple, uncomplicated serenity. But here it was. And I was in it. Alive. I didn't realize, not right away, not consciously, that I was trapped. If you asked me today which specific words, which subtle actions, should have raised the very first, glaring red flag, I probably couldn't even tell you with any certainty. Todd was far too adept, too cunning, at being just enough thoughtful, just enough reliable, just enough smart. And that ithing, that dangerous illusion I mistook for mature strength and protective concern, it was, in reality, insidious, suffocating control. Not long after we first met, he started ordering for both of us at restaurants. You absolutely love the spicy shrimp pasta here, right, babe? He'd say with a confident, charming smile, then immediately place our order with the waiter, without ever pausing, without ever waiting for me to actually speak, to confirm or deny. I didn't think it was strange at the time. Naively, I thought it was sweet, endearing. It felt, back then, like the first time someone had truly, deeply known me, understood my preferences without me needing to articulate them. Later, much later, he'd say, his tone casual but firm, "Don't wear that skirt today, Joanna. It's a little too short. I don't want you catching a chill." Then it would be, "Don't go to that particular coffee shop anymore. Something unpleasant happened there last week. It's not really safe for you." I had never been in a relationship before where someone seemed to take such meticulous eye care of me, or more accurately, gradually, systematically, took everything from me. I thought it was love. Now, with the painful clarity of hindsight, I know it was a razor, slowly, expertly, paring away pieces of myself. The year we got married, I was 27, full of hopes and dreams. I quit my job, a job I actually enjoyed, not because Todd explicitly forced me to, but because he said it again and again, in that concerned, loving voice he perfected. You're always complaining about your demanding job, about your unreasonable boss, honey? Why don't you just take a real break? I make more than enough for both of us. You deserve it. I still remember, with a sickening lurch in my stomach, how I replied, my voice full of gratitude and relief. Really? You're okay with me being a housewife for a little while? He smiled then, that disarming, boyish smile, and ruffled my hair affectionately. Of course, baby. I honestly think you're far more valuable and productive at home, creating a sanctuary for us than you ever could be anywhere else. And I, fool that I was, believed him. Utterly. But 6 short months later, when I tentatively, hopefully, brought up the idea of perhaps looking for part-time work again, just to have something of my own, his expression, his entire demeanor, underwent a chilling transformation. Why on earth would you want to do what? He asked, his voice suddenly devoid of warmth. Didn't we agree that you'd stay home? Did you somehow forget the detailed plan I meticulously made for you, I guess? The plan he made for me. That seemingly innocuous phrase would go on to define the suffocating contours of our marriage. He decided I was sleeping in too much, so he unilaterally swapped our beloved blackout curtains for flimsy, sheer ones, claiming it would help reset my natural circadian rhythm. He decreed I was becoming cooped up and isolated for too long in the house, so we started going absolutely everywhere together. Workouts at his gym, monotonous grocery runs, even the most mundane errands. Suddenly, even a quick, solo trip to the corner store for milk felt like an unattainable, forbidden luxury. He asserted with an air of irrefutable authority that I wasn't very good at making or keeping friends. So my already small circle of phone contacts slowly, insidiously, dwindled until it consisted of just him, his overly critical mother, and 2 other carefully vetted acquaintances. One by one, the rest of my friends, my connections to my old life, simply disappeared. And I, shamefully, didn't even notice their absence at first, so consumed was I by his overwhelming presence. I made endless excuses for him, for his increasingly controlling behavior. That means, well, he loves me deeply. He just shows it in his own unique, protective way. But by the time I finally, terrifyingly, understood what was truly, undeniably happening, I couldn't go anywhere without first reporting my intended movements, my estimated time of return. I couldn't even read a book peacefully at night without him demanding a detailed explanation of its plot, its themes, as if searching for hidden messages or subversive ideas. It wasn't love. It was a slow, brutal domestication, the cruelest, most insidious kind. Everyone, on the surface, thought I was deliriously happy. He paraded me at every social gathering, every business function, always holding my hand a little too tightly, his smile a little too fixed, as he proudly introduced me. This is my wonderful wife, Joanna. Anytime I seemed to drift off, lost in my own thoughts, he would gently, almost imperceptibly, place a hand on the small of my back, a gesture that appeared loving, a tender nudge, but was, in reality, a silent, urgent cue. Aim, fix your face. Smile. You get far too emotional sometimes, baby, too intense. He'd say it while his fingers tapped softly, rhythmically, almost hypnotically, against my knee, and the sound of it, the feel of it, reminded me of a slow, persistent, maddening leak, a single drop, again and again, quietly, relentlessly eating away at the solid stone beneath it. But I didn't cry out back then, didn't scream for help. I foolishly thought that if I just stayed quiet, if I just tried harder to be what he wanted, it would somehow, magically, get better. That wasn't patience. That was a creeping, soul-destroying numbness. The day everything irrevocably changed. The day the final, fragile illusion shattered. Wasn't even particularly dramatic. Nothing overtly violent happened. Not at first. I looked at my phone for a little too long. Really, that's all it was. It was late afternoon, the sun casting long shadows across the kitchen floor. I was in the kitchen, listlessly prepping dinner, when my phone, lying on the couch in the adjoining living room, buzzed with an incoming message. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over to retrieve it. It was from Rose, my old college roommate, someone I hadn't spoken to in months. She'd just had a baby and had sent me a picture, a tiny, adorable infant swaddled in a soft blue blanket. I looked at it for maybe 5 seconds, a faint, wistful smile touching my lips. Maybe less. Todd emerged silently from his home office, his footsteps unnervingly quiet on the plush carpet. "Who was that?" he asked, his tone deliberately casual, as if it meant absolutely nothing to him. "Oh, just Rose," I said, trying to sound equally nonchalant. "My old college friend. She just had her baby." I smiled, a genuine, fleeting smile, and set the phone down on the coffee table. "You remember her, right? She was at our wedding." He nodded slowly, but his eyes, those sharp, observant eyes, shifted, narrowed. "You two been talking a lot lately?" I blinked, a sudden unease prickling my skin. "No, not really. Not since. We haven't actually seen each other in probably 6 months at least." "Then why?" he pressed, his voice dropping slightly. "Did you smile like Arcta?" I froze, and only then, with a jolt of belated awareness, did I realize how uncomfortably close he was standing, looming over me. I just thought the baby was cute," I stammered, my throat suddenly dry. He didn't respond, didn't move. He just stared at me, his gaze intense, unreadable, for another long, suffocating moment. Then, he turned abruptly and walked back into his office, closing the door with a soft, ominous click. I thought, with a surge of foolish relief, that was the end of it. That night, at dinner, he didn't speak a single word, and I, cowed and fearful, didn't dare to break the oppressive silence. After I had finished washing the dishes, my hands trembling slightly, and came back to the bedroom, he was sitting on the edge of the bed, holding my phone in his hand, the screen illuminated. "You changed your passcode," he stated, his voice flat, accusatory. I updated the operating system," I said, struggling to keep my voice calm, even. "The old one, it just stopped working after the update, and you didn't think, not for 1 second, to telling me," he demanded, his voice rising. "You know how much I absolutely hated being kept in the dark, Joanna. I wasn't trying to hide anything, Todd. He didn't wait for me to finish my faltering explanation. He threw the phone, hard, onto the bed. I jumped violently at the sudden, sharp sound, my whole body flinching as if struck. "You're lying," he said, his voice dangerously quiet now, a low, menacing growl that chilled me straight to the bone. I opened my mouth to try and explain, to protest my innocence. But no words came out. My throat constricted with fear. And then he shoved me. Hard to eine schön. I hit the wall, not hard enough to break any bones, not then, but just hard enough for everything inside me, every carefully constructed defense, every last shred of denial, to shift, to shatter. A flash of white light, sharp and painful, shot across my vision, and it felt as if a hidden critical switch had been violently flipped in the deepest recesses of my mind. He was still speaking, his voice a torrent of accusations, berating me for my perceived betrayal, for ruining his trust, for being fundamentally dishonest. But I couldn't hear a single word of it anymore. I slid slowly down the cool, unyielding wall, clutching my chest, not from physical pain, but because I suddenly, terrifyingly, couldn't breathe. And I realized something with a stark, devastating clarity. This wasn't the first time he had said those cruel, cutting things. But it wasn't the first time he had ever put his hands on me in anger. And I had done nothing, said nothing, because I simply didn't know what else to do, how to react. That night, I sat huddled on the cold floor of the living room, long after he had gone to bed, his snores echoing from the bedroom. I waited in the suffocating silence, not moving, scarcely breathing, the darkness a heavy, oppressive blanket. Then, with trembling fingers, I picked up my phone from where it lay on the rug and turned it on. I didn't call the police. The thought was too terrifying, too overwhelming. I didn't text Rose. What could I possibly say? I just opened my notes app and typed one single, shaky line. This is not what marriage is supposed to be. Then, I turned off the screen, my heart a leaden weight in my chest, and curled up in the deep shadow beneath the oversized couch, hugging my knees to my chest like a lost, frightened child, waiting for a dawn that felt impossibly far away. Time seemed to move with a strange, distorted velocity after that night. Todd became increasingly volatile, his anger flaring faster, more unpredictably, over the smallest, most insignificant perceived slights. Sometimes he hit me, open-handed slaps that left my ears ringing, or shoves that sent me sprawling. Sometimes hard enough to necessitate a furtive, shame-filled trip to the ER, where I would spin a well-rehearsed, flimsy tale of my own clumsiness. And I kept going back. I kept going home, because in my terrified, manipulated mind, I genuinely believed I didn't have anywhere else to go. That day, the day Mom finally came, I timed it down to the very second. I waited, cowering, in the small, steamy bathroom, my ears strained, listening with an almost animalistic intensity for the familiar sound of his car pulling away from the curb, the aggressive rumble of its engine finally disappearing around the far corner. Only then, after an agonizingly long wait, did I dare to cautiously step out. It wasn't the kind of raw, overt fear that makes you scream or sob uncontrollably. It was the kind that hollows you out from the inside, a quiet, insidious terror, cold and sticky as a spider's web. I leaned heavily against the cool tile of the bathroom door, my legs weak and trembling, and gripped my phone in my hand like it was a piece of life-saving driftwood in a raging, merciless sea. I managed, with fumbling, shaking fingers, to back up one small, password-protected folder of notes and dates to my rarely used email account. I hid that single, crumpled hospital report deep within my nightstand drawer, a desperate, almost futile act of defiance. That was all I could manage, all I dared to do. Because honestly, deep down, I didn't truly believe anyone was actually coming for me. Not anymore. Until I heard her voice. My mom. She was just standing there, in the open doorway of the apartment, a figure of unexpected strength and resolve in her old familiar trench coat, her graying hair pulled back tightly from her face. Not panicked, not breathless, just ready. I almost burst into tears, a wave of overwhelming, incredulous relief washing over me. She wrapped her strong, comforting arms around me, held me close, so close, and didn't say a single word, just let me absorb her presence. And then, together, we started packing. She moved with a quiet, efficient speed, as if she'd done this 100 times before. She found the hidden report in the nightstand without me needing to point it out, her intuition, as always, unerring. She helped me gather a few essential clothes, a handful of toiletries. We didn't take much. If he noticed anything significant missing, it might unravel everything, trigger his rage prematurely. Before we finally left, I paused at the doorway. I looked back, one last time, at the apartment that had become my prison, at the bed where I'd cried myself to sleep, night after desolate night, stifling my sobs into the unyielding pillow, at the smudged bathroom mirror where I'd once, in a moment of fleeting, desperate hope, scrawled "just hold on a little longer" in bright red lipstick, only to scrub it away in shame hours later, at the room I had once naively, foolishly, believed would be my sanctuary, my haven. I didn't cry then. I didn't linger. I just turned to my mom, my rock, my rescuer, and said, my voice surprisingly steady, "Let's go." As the rental car pulled away from the curb, away from that street, that building, that life, I kept my head down, my gaze fixed on my lap. Not because I was afraid of being seen by a curious neighbor, but because I didn't want Gary to see me, to see the full extent of my brokenness. Because I knew, with a terrible certainty, that if she looked too closely, if she saw the raw, unvarnished truth in my eyes, I'd completely fall apart. And once that dam finally broke, I wasn't sure I possessed the strength, the will, to ever put myself back together again. But she saw anyway. Of course, she saw. She pulled the car over to the side of the road a few blocks later, turned off the engine, and reached back for my hand, her fingers gently, firmly, wrapping around mine. And I couldn't hold it in anymore. The tears came then, hard and fast and ugly, the kind of gut-wrenching sobs you can't quiet, can't swallow, can't control. "Mom," I choked out, the words torn from me. I really, Drydig, I'm not weak. I tried. "I know, sweetheart," she said softly, her voice a soothing balm. "I've always known. You never had to prove that to me." I sobbed, great, shuddering gasps. "It's not that I didn't want to call for help, Mom. I felt so incredibly ashamed. I didn't even want to admit the truth to myself, let alone to anyone else." She didn't say, "Don't cry." She didn't say it's okay now. She just held my hand, her grip steady, solid, a silent, unwavering anchor, as if to say, "You're not crazy. You're not the problem. You just haven't been pulled safely to shore yet. And now, I'm here." During that first disorienting week, after I got out, after Mom brought me back to Spring Hill, I barely said a complete sentence. Mom didn't push me, didn't pressure me. She cooked nourishing meals I could barely touch. She quietly tidied the small, peaceful house. Sometimes, she just sat beside me on the old sofa while the television hummed mindlessly in the background, a comforting, undemanding presence. But she never once asked when I'd be ready to talk, to unburden myself. Still, I knew she was waiting, patiently, lovingly. It wasn't fear that kept me silent anymore. It was a profound, suffocating shame. I found I couldn't look her directly in the eye. When she turned away to head into the kitchen or to answer the phone, I'd steal furtive, anxious glances at her face, desperately trying to read her expression, to gauge whether she was disappointed in me, whether she thought I'd somehow wasted her valiant effort, her unwavering worry, her courageous trip to Cedar Falls. But her face remained open, her demeanor gentle. No interrogation, no blame, no judgment. Not once did she ever say, "Why didn't you speak up sooner, Joanna?" And the quieter, the more patient she was, the worse the guilt gnawed at me. I felt like a damp, useless match, meant to spark, desperate to burn brightly, but instead just sputtering out in a slow, sticky, pathetic trail of smoke. Not fire, not even cleansing ash. Just stuck, miserably, somewhere in between. One night, I couldn't hold it in any longer. The silence, the unspoken words, became unbearable. I turned to her, where she sat reading in her worn armchair, and said, my voice barely a whisper, "Mom, I knew he was controlling me. I knew it for a long, long time." She didn't act surprised, didn't even lower her book. She just asked, her voice gentle, inflectionless, "Then why didn't you leave, sweetheart?" I lowered my head, staring at my tightly clenched hands in my lap, my voice cracking as I finally confessed the shameful truth. Because I thought it was my fault. I didn't make any money. I didn't have many real friends left. I was bad at social stuff, always too emotional, too sensitive. I thought the moment I left, people would say, "See, she couldn't handle a real marriage. She failed." I thought she might think that too. She set her book aside then, came to sit beside me on the sofa, and took my cold, trembling hand in hers. "Joanna," she said, her voice soft but imbued with an undeniable, unwavering certainty. "The very fact that you can say this out loud now, that you can acknowledge these feelings, already makes you braver than most people will ever be. You are not a failure, my darling girl. You are not a problem here. You are just a good, kind person who spent far too long, too many years, carrying the crushing weight of someone else's egregious mistakes, someone else's darkness. The tears came again then, hard and fast, but this time they felt different, somehow cleansing. "I'm 36 years old, Mom," I sobbed. "I'm not a girl anymore." She pulled me into her arms then, a fierce, protective embrace, and whispered into my hair, "Then let me owe you one childhood, Joanna. Let me try and give some of it back to you now." That night, for the first time in what felt like an entire lifetime, I slept through until morning without waking once in a cold, paralyzing panic. The days that followed weren't easy, not by any means. I started therapy, twice a week, with a kind, insightful woman Mom found. I tentatively reached out to a few old friends, their voices a hesitant but welcome balm. I painstakingly worked on my outdated resume, practiced for nerve-wracking online teaching interviews, the prospect of re-entering the workforce, both terrifying and exhilarating. I tried with all my might not to care about what the gossiping neighbors in Cedar Falls might be thinking or saying. I tried even harder not to compulsively check if Todd had posted anything new on his meticulously curated social media, a ghost I was still struggling to exorcise. I deliberately avoided the treacherous comment sections of online news articles where my name, my story, might be callously dissected and buried under an avalanche of anonymous cruelty. But I knew, realistically, that complete detachment was an illusion. Some nights, I still woke up gasping for air, whispering I'm sorry. I'm so sorry into the unforgiving darkness. And those apologies, I realized, with a painful clarity, they weren't for him. They were for AMA. For every lost year I stayed. For every eroded boundary I allowed to slip. For every insidious lie I told myself, just to survive another day, another week, another month. But I've started to understand, slowly, painstakingly, that I can't live in that suffocating space of I'm sorry forever. I survive. And that, I'm learning, is the most honest, most powerful answer I can give myself. A few days later, I went with Mom to return some overdue books at the small town library. The young woman at the circulation desk smiled brightly and said, "Oh, hi, you must be Madison Dawson's daughter. She comes in all the time. She's wonderful. Helps us organize the entire children's section. She's a lifesaver." I froze for half a second, my breath catching in my throat, before I managed a small, hesitant nod. "Yes," I said, my voice surprisingly clear. "Yes, I am." And just like that, in that simple, unmomentous exchange, for the very first time in what felt like an eternity, I claimed an identity in public without flinching, without shame. Not as someone's silently suffering wife, not as someone's fading, forgotten shadow, but as someone's daughter. As if someone. I realized then, with a sudden illuminating insight, that identity isn't something other people assign to you or take from you. It's something you, and only you, can claim, can own. I'm not the woman who got hurt. I'm not the girl who was taken away. I'm Joanna Dawson. I'm alive, and I'm slowly, painstakingly building a new life, brick by fragile brick. Sometimes in quiet moments, I think about Todd, not with anger anymore, not with that burning, corrosive rage that once consumed me, not even with longing, God forbid, just with distance, a vast, unbridgeable distance. He was a period, an ending. He, unwittingly, cruelly, closed the heavy, creaking door on the most chaotic, painful decade of my life. And for that, in a strange, twisted way, I am grateful. So deeply, profoundly grateful for that lost, terrified version of me who, alone in the suffocating darkness of that apartment, once found the courage to type that one, small, defiant sentence. "This is not what marriage should be." If she hadn't written that, if that last tiny spark of her true self hadn't refused to be extinguished, maybe I'd still be there, still telling myself, just wait a little longer. Just hold on. It will get better. That one sentence, That fragile flicker of rebellion was the last spark of myself refusing to die out completely. Mom told me once, not long after I came home, that her biggest, most terrifying fear wasn't that Todd would somehow find me, would come looking for me again. It was that one day, perhaps years from now, I'd turn to her and say, with a resigned sigh, "You know, Mom, he wasn't kinfight bad, really." I actually laughed, a raw, incredulous sound when she said that. "I will never say that, Mom. Never." "How can you be so sure, sweetheart?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. I took her hand, my grip firm, my gaze unwavering. "Because I'm done being someone people make excuses for, Mom. I want to be someone who owns her own life, her own story, her own truth." She looked at me then, for a long, silent moment, and there was something bright and beautiful shining in her eyes, something akin to pride, to relief. Neither of us said another word, but I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that she heard me. She understood. This morning, I hung my freshly washed bedsheets out in the bright, warm sun. The light was perfect, golden and cleansing. The gentle breeze on the small balcony drifted through the fabric like a quiet, unseen blessing, drying more than just cotton and linen. It felt like it was drying the shame, the fear, the crippling self-doubt I'd carried like a heavy, invisible shroud for so long. I stood there for a long time, just watching the white sheets sway gently in the wind, their clean expanse like blank pages, like they were waving at me, beckoning me forward. "Joanna," I whispered to myself, a silent affirmation. "What you have now, this precious, hard-won thing, is freedom. Not the frantic, desperate kind you run breathlessly toward after escaping someone else's cage, but the quiet, steady, rooted kind you stay for, the kind you consciously, deliberately choose for yourself every single day. This freedom, this profound internal liberty, doesn't come with a dramatic, standing ovation. There are no celebratory flowers, no swelling, cinematic soundtrack. But it's real. It's quiet. And it's rooted, deeply and irrevocably, in every single decision I've made since I finally stopped waiting for someone else's permission to simply live. I know there's still more ahead. A long road of rebuilding, of relearning how to trust, both myself and others. Of tentatively working again, of perhaps someday, starting new relationships, of daring to let people in, to be vulnerable again. And maybe I'll get hurt again. That's the risk of living, of loving. Maybe I'll trust someone who ultimately doesn't deserve it. Maybe I'll stand in a crowded, noisy room and still feel that familiar pang of profound loneliness. But I'm not afraid anymore. Not in that old, paralyzing way. Because I am no longer the woman passively waiting for someone else to tell her who she is, what she's worth. I've come back. I've come home. To myself. I am Joanna. A woman standing, finally, in her own sunlight.